Let's go back to our working model, and this time I'm going to start with the session 2 model federation in ArchiCAD. And the first thing we're going to do is to build that model federation within our own working model. So if you remember the basic idea of a federation, if we go back to our BIM Collab file, what we have is your own model, but we also have the structural model that we have in the resource files and the MEP model that corresponds to the same building. And when you put them all together, that's what we normally call a federation. Now, there is a great advantage of doing that in a coordination software like BIM Collab Zoom, but eventually you'll need to get that inside ArchiCAD, at least some elements. So let's go and do that. So back in ArchiCAD, I'm going to start by using this next folder, IFC links. And what we're going to do is simply go down to the ground floor and let's save this view right here. So I'm going to do a right click, save current view, and I'm just going to call it for reference, ground floor links. Now, the first step in the process of linking several files inside ArchiCAD, particularly IFC files, is to set up dedicated translators. The IFC translators are located under File, Interoperability, IFC, and IFC Translators. In this interface, you have two groups, translators for import, translators for export. The ones we're going to use for the sake of linking in files will be the translators for import. So let's start by creating a new translator based on one of the existing ones for linking in the structural and the services file, the MEP file. Now you have noticed that we have some pre-built translators in there, general one, model applications, Revit, and so on. And they just preset certain items that are common to those software applications. You don't really need to use those, but you can use them as a starting point. So the first one that we're going to build in here will be a new translator based on the Revit structure import. And we're going to call that structural or STR link. And that name is the name that I'm going to use for most of the other presets. Now the presets we're talking about are the model filter, that allows you to filter in and out the elements that you want to bring in from the IFC, meaning that you don't have to bring in everything. You can have a selection of items. The type mapping, which is usually standard and you should not change, and that changes or bring in things from IFC types into ArchiCAD types. Then there is the property mapping, which allows you to bring in properties as IFC properties, as normally happens, or mapping them into ArchiCAD properties. Geometry conversion, which is responsible for transforming elements, given the fact that they might be B-reps or extruded elements, into cross-section elements, that is the wall, the column, the beam, the slab tool, and so on, or alternatively as B-reps using morphs and objects. This preset, it's also responsible for bringing in the site geometry and controlling how the coordinates will be handled. Typically, like in our case, where the project is IFC located and geolocated, you want to use the site location. Then there's a layer convention because the IFC does use layers and you want to make sure that that is mapped somewhere. So let's start by creating presets for this translator. First one will be the model filter, and I'm just going to click on new and give it the same name, structural link. I'm going to make sure that it brings grids if I want to align those grids with mine. And let's click on OK. And select that preset. I'm not going to change the type mapping, and I'll suggest you not to do it either. The property mapping, I'll create a new one. And this is going to allow me to manipulate which properties later on I want to bring in from that file. For now, I'm just going to leave it as IFC properties, but I could also map the IFC properties from the file into ArchiCAD properties. I won't do that yet, but we will do that eventually. Then the geometry conversion. Again, I'm just going to create a dedicated translator. And I'm going to bring it as it is, meaning I'm going to bring in construction elements. And in the cases where that's not possible, then I want those elements to be converted to objects. Location-wise, it's going to be using the site location. Layer conversion. This one I'm going to manipulate. And what you want to do is to have a dedicated layer and an extension for those layers such that you can locate them easily. So I'm going to click on New to have a new preset. I'm going to call this Structural or STR. And for the layer destination, you want to have a link or a link folder, which we already have built in the template, called link structure, knowing that all the layers that are contained into that IFC will land inside that folder. So let's choose that and click on OK. And make sure that is the preset selected. And when it comes to materials, then you can either use the preset or make a copy of it. What it's going to do is to transfer materials that are already in that initially a Revit file, which a number of preset conventions, down into ArchiCAD built-in materials. So I'm just going to leave that. I'm going to use that unless I change it later on. So let's click on OK. And now let's click on OK again. Later on, we're going to bring in the services file and adjust a translator for that file.